Hello everyone, and welcome to the full commentary for Metal Gear Solid 1 for the PlayStation 1. I'm going to be playing through the entire game and commenting on anything that kind of catches my eye or comes to mind while I'm playing. This is a game that I've played possibly more than any other game in my entire life. That's partially because it's so short, but also I think it has a lot of replay value. There are a lot of extra items you can win by beating the game with different endings and coming back, and also the number of times that you've beaten it. But for this time I'm just going to play through on normal with a brand new game. Now usually with most games I tend to play through on normal, just because I feel that it's the version of the game that the developers wanted you to play when they were creating it, therefore it's the most balanced. And on this game I think it's especially important, because on any difficulty above normal they actually take the radar away, and in this game the camera is always generally top down onto Snake, and I just don't think it works as well when you can't see what's in front of you. Of course, this game has a lot of cutscenes and codec calls, so I'm generally going to be skipping through most of those, except for where it's rather important for the story or if I have something interesting to say about it. So after the short entry where Snake enters the facility through Scuba, we have a short scene here at the docks. Now, having the player play through this area serves two purposes for the game. It's both the tutorial for the game and learning the controls, and it's also a place for the opening credits roll, which is a way that this game really tries to replicate cinema. Nowadays it seems like calling your game cinematic is either a good thing or a bad thing, but this is one of the games that really pioneered that, and it later became Kojima's style anyway. One thing I like about this room is that there's a lot of boxes, which lets the player be able to play a kind of cat and mouse game with the guards. They may not know how to kill the guards yet, so this is a really good addition, just so the player's not going to be overwhelmed. Now, one thing that's strange is the water in this room that Snake can walk through, which alerts the guards through his footsteps, is never used again anywhere in the game. There are some loud floorings, but this is the only one that involves water. Another thing about this area is, a lot like other games, the player is rewarded for searching it thoroughly. If you turn around from where you began, you'll actually find an item in the water, which changes depending on your difficulty. There's really nothing to do here but dodge the guards and pick up items, but after enough time the elevator comes down, which allows us to move on to the next area. Up here on the helipad, the use of the Soliton radar and binoculars are officially introduced by the game, which is really setting the theme for stealth. I really like how the guards here continue to show off different aspects of the AI behavior. For example, the guard in the top left continually falls asleep, and the one on the right can see your footprints in the snow. This is another thing that's never used again in the game. Any other snowy area doesn't have any patrolling guards. There are a few items to pick up here, usually the chaff grenades and the SOCOM pistol. But one obstacle that's introduced here are the surveillance cameras, which also encourages using the chaff grenades that you just found. One thing I don't like in this area is the searchlights. It's just really easy to be seen by them, and the player's just getting used to Snake's speed at this point anyway. It also illustrates how binary the sneaking in this game is. You're either undetected or you're completely seen. In this case, you can see I get just barely touched by the light and I'm completely exposed. There are two ways to leave through this area. You can either sneak through the vents in the bottom left, or you can take the vent on the top. After crawling through and being introduced to Master Miller, we enter the tank hangar, which is one of the early game's most frequently visited spots. The tank hangar here introduces the use of different card keys, which kind of gives this game sort of a Metroid-like design, where whenever you get a new item that can unlock doors, you always want to go back and see what you can get. The game gives you a freebie here, with one of the first rooms being completely unlocked. There is also an elevator in this room which connects to 2 more floors, and I really like this design. Overall, Metal Gear Solid takes place in just about 3 buildings, and each of those buildings has 1 or 2 floors. The smaller spaces that are repeated really kind of sink this area's geography into the player's brains really quickly. Our first stop is to take the elevator down to B1, which takes us into the cell room area. By climbing through the vents here, you can actually peer down and get a quick glimpse at Meryl before she's officially introduced. But our real goal is to get to the second cell room, which holds the DARPA chief. The cutscene here contains the first big surprise of the game, where after talking about the terrorist plans, the DARPA chief suddenly falls dead. I like this surprise here as it really disarms the player. Snake and Campbell are always saying different military jargon, and it really feels realistic up until this point. Instead, here the DARPA chief is going on about psychic soldiers reading people's minds before a conveniently timed heart attack stops him. I think the scene following, with Meryl letting Snake out of the room and them together having to fight off soldiers, is one of the better moments in the game. Meryl is characterized as a rookie soldier before we even have a conversation with her, as this moment expresses her inability to kill or really act well under pressure through gameplay. This scene is a bit hampered by the awkward controls of the game, but it does show how aiming works. Snake auto-aims to a target whenever he holds out his gun, but when the enemies are in close proximity, he tends to jump back and forth between them very easily. It really shows how this game is not well suited to very much combat, and luckily this scene is pretty short. Now, the next stop is to take the elevator down to the basement floor 2, where the armory lies. The goal here is to get to the president of Armstech, and to do so, Snake needs to use C4 bombs to blow up the walls. This armory is another one of the most frequently visited areas because it has a lot of rooms that clearly show that you're going to need to come back here with various card keys. Once you find the C4, there's actually 2 extra rooms you can go here that I completely missed on my first playthrough. There's not a lot here, but it's just a nice little secret for those people paying attention. You know you're going the right direction when the scene transitions to a brand new area, and I really like how the jammed radar here gives the player an uneasy feeling. We finally get to meet Revolver Ocelot, who is probably my favorite character in the entire Metal Gear series, but the fight with him here isn't particularly impressive. It's just a bit simple. You really just need to chase him around, and actually the fastest way to beat him is to try to trust Snake's auto-aim and shoot him around corners or from farther away. This doesn't really work that well. Anyway, after that's done, we get to meet the Cyborg Ninja for the first time and have a little chat with President Baker. Of course, President Baker here dies in the same way that the DARPA chief did, and this is kind of a double bluff that the game is pulling on you. It turns out later that the chief was actually Decoy Octopus, one of the Foxhound terrorists, but when you see both him and Baker die together, you're instantly less suspicious of either of them. Another thing that we see happen in this room is after beating the boss, Snake's health and ammo capacity both go up. Snake's initial tiny health bar and lack of items ensures that the beginning of the game actually contains the game's highest difficulty wall, but this eases off as the game goes on. I personally think that this was probably put in place to heighten the feeling that the player gets of being a legendary soldier, where at the beginning they feel extremely helpless with little options, but by the end they're nearly unstoppable. Our next goal is to find Meryl, and we're told to do so by Baker while he's still alive by looking at the back of the CD case. This is of course one of Kojima's famous fourth wall breaking moments, but this idea is actually entirely copied from his previous game, Metal Gear 2. There are many unique ideas and moments from this game that are borrowed from that, so I'm going to be trying to point each of those out as we go along. After contacting Meryl, she agrees to open the door to allow us to get to the next area, but there's a little bit of a wait time before she's able to do this. This may have been to give the player a chance to use their new keycards in this area, which gives you a few extra items before heading out into the Snow Canyon. The first part of the canyon has a surprise call from someone calling themselves Deep Throat, which was the codename of an informer during the Nixon-Watergate scandal, and doesn't come from anything else you might be thinking. The canyon is also where we encounter our second boss, Vulcan Raven and his soldiers in the tank. To me, this fight has always been the most forgettable of all of them. Vulcan Raven taunts you at the start, but as soon as the battle begins, he shuts his mouth and doesn't appear until much, much later. Calling the Colonel here has him point out your other contact, Nastasha, who advises you to use the chaff grenades. One of the most prudent things to do whenever you enter any boss encounter in this, and even the later games, is always to call everyone in your contact list just to see what they have to say. Nastasha, for example, tells you to use the chaff grenades, which turns this fight into kind of a strange chase, where Snake is trying to run circles around the tank while throwing grenades on top. It doesn't take too many successful throws to end this battle, and we can continue on to the nuclear storage building. This room has Snake being barred from using his weapons, which can be really intimidating for players who've come to rely on their gun a bit too much. The guards and cameras in here are pretty well spread out, making this overall a fair challenge. The presence of a second truck here unlocks a basic kind of fast travel system that not many players were aware of. By putting on a cardboard box and sitting in the truck, Snake will be transported to one of 3 locations, depending on which box he's wearing. The only box we have now is for the helipad, and I have no reason to go back there, so I'm just going to continue on. Once again, there's 3 floors to explore here, and the B1 floor doesn't offer too much for me except for the Nikita missile launcher I'm going to need in a moment. Heading to B2 sets up the next set piece, one which was also borrowed from Metal Gear 2. Snake needs to shoot a missile around corners through an awkward path in order to break a power generator. One thing I actually like is the addition of the gas in this room, which adds an additional layer of tension to getting your missile to hit just right. After a couple tries, I eventually get it, and we can head on to the bloody hallway for our encounter with Otacon and the Cyborg Ninja. Kojima sets up quite a bit of anticipation for the moment, with one of the grimmest scenes in the series. There's some truly disturbing music going on here in the background, just giving this a really eerie vibe. I really love this setup, but the fight with the Cyborg Ninja has always disappointed me a bit. It's pretty fun to find out that he isn't looking for a gun battle and just wants you to drop your weapon and fight him with your fists, but the fighting mechanics in this game are a bit overly simple, pulling this moment down a bit. I will say it's a lot better than the later hand-to-hand fight we'll have, but it doesn't stick out in my memory as especially great. Otacon, who would go on to be the second most important character in the series, is also first introduced here. He's characterized as a naive scientist whose work is abused by his superiors. He has a bit of an arc throughout this game, where after learning that his Metal Gear project is going to be used to launch nuclear weapons, he teams up with Snake despite having no experience with combat. The tag team of Snake and Otacon, where Snake is the muscle and Otacon the brain, has always made for an appealing team-up, and as a result, Otacon is a character that I've always liked seeing in the games. After finishing things on this floor, we can head up to B1, where we have a short section meeting up with Meryl, who's disguised as an enemy soldier. It's pretty obvious where they want you to meet her, with this area being the only place with a separate bathroom for women, and I've always found it pretty funny that if the player's extremely fast about getting to Meryl, she'll be in her underwear for the entire next scene. Oh, and finding a friend who's disguised as an enemy is another moment borrowed from Metal Gear 2. The following meeting with Psycho Mantis is a moment that's gone on to be legendary for many gamers. Kojima, ever since Metal Gear 1, has shown a love for playing with players' expectations, and the last thing most people expected was for a boss to talk to them about playing Castlevania and go on messing with their television sets. One thing I especially like about this fight is, after you found out the secret that you need to change your controller entry from 1 to 2, Psycho Mantis still offers up a pretty good boss fight. All of his attacks can be dodged by crawling, but he's also very mobile, so you've got to be up and running in order to get him in range. Towards the end, he begins teleporting around faster than the player can really react to, but since he's hijacked your first-person view, you can actually use that to get a lead on him. His death scene, as well as the deaths of the later Foxhound members, began a trend of really tasteful and fascinating deathbed conversations. These moments are quite solemn, but they've always been cutscenes I've enjoyed watching and reflecting on. To me, they're some of the most memorable moments in the game. After the fight with Mantis, we get to enter the cave, which I feel is by far the weakest area of the game. The layout here is generally confusing, mostly because the camera doesn't adequately reveal which walls you can crawl under and not. And the dogs here are rather obnoxious to fight against. There's not really any good ways to sneak past them, and there's also not any good ways to put them down once they're chasing after you. I tend to just punch them and try to move on as fast as possible. It feels like this is a moment of the game that the developers couldn't fully flesh out, because they established that Meryl has a certain relationship with the dogs, and perhaps it could have been more interesting that you have to follow and stay close to her to keep the dogs from becoming aggressive towards you. Unfortunately, Snake is going to have to pass through this area at least 3 times total before getting through the game. We next end up in the underground tunnel, where Meryl shows us an extremely convoluted way to avoid the mines. Most people tend to know you can just run straight, and I'm not quite sure what Kojima was trying to accomplish here. My best guess is this is a joke. This pretty silly moment is followed up with one of the best moments in the game in my opinion. Meryl gets shot by Sniper Wolf, and Snake has nothing he can do to save her. So far, Snake has been completely unstoppable and able to protect Meryl, having just stopped her from being killed by Psycho Mantis before. Here, the only option available to the player and him is to just leave Meryl there and run away. It's a really good bit of ironic reversal and can be quite frustrating for players who want to save her as fast as possible. Unfortunately, being able to save her involves having to go back through the cave and doing the game's first backtracking mission. Fortunately, if the player's not too caught up with wanting to save Meryl ASAP, this is actually a really good chance to try your new keycard out on any rooms that you left hanging in the previous locations. This is also a good time to use your cardboard boxes to skip quite a bit of the areas too. In total, there are about 3 big backtracking sections throughout the game, and this one's really the best one for a variety of reasons. Arriving back in the underground tunnel with the sniper rifle, we have our first fight against Sniper Wolf. The fight in this area is really nothing special, but the tight corridors always make it really confusing every time you get shot. She fires extremely fast, and every time Snake is in first person and gets hit, he swings wildly out of control, making it hard to find her again. Using the diazepam is pretty much a necessity to get through this part, unless you're a lot more patient than I am. One thing that's understated but does help is that Snake actually has 2 speeds of aiming his rifle in this game. If you move the analog stick, he's going to move quite fast, and with the directional pads, he moves a lot slower. So this leads to the physical situation where the player is trying to find her with the analog stick, and then straighten his shot as best as possible with the directional pad. Once you've got a handle on things and you've got the lead on Sniper Wolf, it doesn't take too many more shots to bring her down. After ending up captured, we end up in the torture machine room, where they're quickly threatened with having all of their save data deleted up till their last save. It's quite possible that the player just went through a ton of backtracking, and the prospect of losing their save and having to do that all again would be quite threatening on several levels. I hate to think that anyone really did lose their save here and would have to do all of that again, but it's just one of those things that Kojima wanted to deliver, so he went ahead and did it. This moment where Snake either resists or submits to the torture affects the ending of the game, which is all dependent on whether Meryl is allowed to survive or not. This can also change the extra item that you get at the end, either being the unlimited ammo bandana from Meryl or the stealth camouflage from Otacon. Personally, there's no question about it, the stealth camo is the much better item, but if the player is very attached to Meryl, they're gonna have to hold out like I do. If the first one of these torture scenes wasn't enough, there's actually a second one that's mandatory before the player is given the chance to escape. Fortunately though, there's actually two different ways to escape. They can either hide under the bed when the guard has gone to the bathroom, or they can call up Otacon and use the ketchup that he gives you in order to simulate an injury. Picking up your gear again also has a nasty little secret from Ocelot who's snuck a bomb into your things. This can be a rather rude awakening if you didn't notice it at all, but hopefully by now the player has learned that the developer is actively messing with you. Once again, Snake is backtracking through familiar territory, but his new level 6 card opens up almost every area in the game from here. If you've been keeping up with things, the only real new item here is the body armor, which becomes extremely handy during the later boss fights. Luckily, going through this cave for the 4th time allows you to use the handkerchief, making this cave area a lot more tolerable. The moment where Snake passes through the underground tunnel and stops at Meryl's bloodstain is a pretty memorable moment in the game for me. It's again reinforcing the themes that the game is presenting, that war is actually an ugly thing, and someone as pure as Meryl was bound for a rude awakening. It also highlights Snake's failure to protect her, which can help the player to bond with them because they're likely feeling the same thing. This is also where Master Miller reintroduces himself. It's easy to forget about him since he actually isn't that useful, but his questions here help to put some initial suspicion onto Naomi. Shortly after passing the tunnel, we have the tower chase sequence, which again is another set piece borrowed from Metal Gear 2. The controls for this game aren't really efficient for this kind of moment, so I always find it best to rush through this as fast as possible. Even though I'm not a big fan of the chase scene, it is miles better from the repelling scene that comes up next, where the sudden introduction of new controls works out really poorly for the game. After his dramatic descent, Snake has another meeting with Otacon that has the famous line, "Can love bloom on the battlefield?" This game tends to serve up pretty strong and cringy melodrama with every turn, but I've always taken this as a chance to embrace the weirdness. I sometimes think people take their lives a little bit too serious, and it can feel good to let loose and not care about looking cool all the time. I know that's not a great defense for strange or cringy dialogue, but with how solemn and serious game narratives seem to be nowadays, I kind of miss situations like this where games would just go all out for their themes. To me, it's always been more fun to just go along with it and allow yourself to be wrapped up in the game's exaggerated logic and interpretations of love and war. The Hind fight at the top of Tower B is actually one of my favorite encounters in the entire game. It has a good flow and the level design of the boss room is really well done. Much like the boxes found in the docks, the box here on the roof allows you to play cat and mouse with the Hind. This gives you a chance to play with the targeting of the Stinger missiles and lead your shots around corners. This is also just one of the most epic moments in the game, and in my opinion, it's the best fight that we're gonna have with Liquid Snake. We come down Tower B through the elevator, where we're suddenly jumped by 4 men in stealth camouflage. This is, again, another moment borrowed from Metal Gear 2. Still, looking back on things, this game is continually throwing different situations at Snake. Even though several of these are callbacks to the previous game in the series, for most Westerners playing this game at the time of its release, nobody had really touched the real Metal Gear 2. I think not knowing where a lot of the set pieces in this game came from really made this game feel like there were a lot of special moments that the developers wanted to put in for you. Sometimes, ignorance can be bliss. The next stop for Snake is the snowfield, where he has the rematch with Sniper Wolf. This was clearly meant to be an epic battle, which is why it's kind of disappointing that the player can just cheese right through it by abusing the Nikita missiles. Given the location and the difficulty in seeing her through the storm, this is obviously a good moment to use your rifle in conjunction with the thermal goggles. Therefore, as you can see, I'm not going to resort to using such cheap tactics. I'm out of Nikita ammo anyway. The death scene for Sniper Wolf is definitely the strongest of these deathbed conversations that the game punctuates each of these fights with. Each of them has an interesting backstory and a relatable personality, which makes it just more of a shame that this is only revealed when they're moments away from their deaths. This is Otacon's first major trauma in these games, something that Kojima is going to cruelly repeat several times on. After passing this scene, there's a few more goodies to pick up on the snowfield before heading into Disc 2, one of which is the third cardboard box, which the game is clearly giving to us here in order to facilitate fast travel around Shadow Moses to pick up any items the player might have missed. If you're satisfied with everything you have so far and you press on, there's really not a reason to ever go back again. Going down the stairs to the blast furnace is a really strong moment to indicate Snake seemingly descending down into a hellish hot area. Despite this pretty strong transition, I've always had a problem with this room, as I've always found it rather insane that Shadow Moses, on top of everything, has a large room that is legitimately filled with lava. Then again, this is the same research and storage facility that also has a medical room with a torture bed, so what do I know? There's a second reason why the game is coming on a little strong with this zone. Eventually, having a clear picture of the temperature of different places in this zone is going to be key when it comes to the game's final backtracking mission. After passing through and getting to the cargo elevator, Snake is ambushed yet again. The enemies here seem to take quite a bit more bullets than is even reasonable, and what's ironic is it's actually a lot faster to just try to grab each of these guys one by one and choke them out. They tend to just get knocked down over and over by bullets, and every time they get up they're likely to chip a little bit more out of your health. There's a short transitionary area between different elevators, and the developers pull a mean little trick here by jamming your camera and putting in a gun turret. This trick is at least a little bit fair, as if you're paying attention you can clearly hear the sound that a security camera makes. Sadly, it seems that the only reason this cargo elevator area exists is for the previous ambush and to bombard Snake with various codec calls, which become extremely frequent at this point in the game. The second elevator is at least more memorable for the crows which begin to crop up here, which again is a little bit of a warning of what Snake's about to encounter. Indeed, Vulcan Raven is up next, and it's amazing for a game that has already impressed with the Psycho Mantis and Sniper Wolf fights that it still has a lot more to offer. This fight is objectively the strongest in the game, and I always try to tackle it a different way each time. When I started out playing the game, I always hunted him down from behind with Stinger missiles, and then on later fights I'd try using C4 and Nikita missiles. Probably the best way to go about it is to only use Claymore mines, which allows the player to be pretty much safe the entire fight. After another excellent deathbed conversation, we enter what I can only call the gun room. I don't really know what to say. I imagine this is just some kind of a joke, or a way for Kojima to show the player that they're about to enter the most secure area in the game. The Metal Gear Rex reveal here is an especially effective moment. Or perhaps I should say that it would be an effective moment if the codec calls weren't becoming extremely unreasonable at this point. On the way to the control room, climbing on and over Metal Gear Rex, Snake is forcibly stopped by 4 different codec calls, turning what should be an amazing moment into frustration. The following cutscene has always struck me as very strange. This is the scene that first introduces that Fox Die is a thing, but it's also revealed that Liquid and Ocelot are fully aware that Snake is listening in. The next part, where Ocelot shoots the extremely important PAL card out of Snake's hand, is completely insane. I can't think of any other word for it. I suppose it could be said that he was just trying to mess up Liquid's plans, since it's later revealed that he was actually a spy for Solidus, but in that case it's just Snake who's insane for holding the important key out into the doorframe. Anyway, there's a small rat hunting sequence here that can be rather annoying, especially since you're never really told, as far as I can tell, that you have to equip the mine detector to see him on the radar. Still, once you've figured out that the rat everyone's talking about is not in the water, it's pretty easy to find him. With this done, we can enter the control room, which is inexplicably empty now, and embark on the game's final backtracking section. There's really nothing special about this section where Snake has to go and freeze the key and then warm the key to enter it 2 more times. To me it seems like they had just simply gotten to the end of the game and realized they still had to wrap up the plot with Naomi. Unlike the previous times we had to backtrack, there's nothing new to explore here, and even if you do go back to the snowfield to open the level 7 door, there's nothing good inside. Basically, whenever I think about replaying this game, this is the point that I always dread the most, so I'm going to spare you and just skip right through it.
PAL code number 2 confirmed.
Okay, I lied. I'm cutting in here in the middle of the backtracking because this is the point where Naomi and Fox Die are revealed as the devices behind the death of the DARPA chief and President Baker. Compared to most video games, this is actually a pretty good twist, especially since Naomi is never physically seen by the player, so Snake and the player are really unable to do anything physically about her actions. This is something that the codec calls are not used nearly enough for. There's something unique about having an antagonist whose actions are completely unable to be affected by the player. After entering all 3 keys, we have another big codec reveal that Master Miller, who's been slightly helping us out all along, was actually Liquid Snake. There's a short and actually pretty easily escapable situation where the room is filled with gas, and after leaving, we're finally at the climactic fight with Metal Gear Rex. For the first 3D Metal Gear fight in the series, this one still holds up remarkably well. Setting up Otacon as the designer of Metal Gear gives the player all the direction they need to proceed in this fight. Right from the very start, they know who they have to call. After learning that the first goal is to break the ray dome and that chaff grenades can help you to dodge the missiles, this fight becomes pretty basic. After busting the ray dome, there's a short intermission where Gray Fox talks to Snake and sacrifices himself to help him. The final moment before his death, where Snake is seeing the last moments of Gray Fox through the Stinger missile scope, is really well done, where the designers again use an inability to fire a weapon in order to flesh out a character. The second part of this fight is hit pretty hard by frame drops, especially with all the chaff particles in the air. But all things considered, I'm happy that they went ahead and made this fight as much of a spectacle as it was at the time. To me, it's much better than getting an underwhelming Metal Gear fight. Finishing this battle takes us into Liquid's speech about his motivations and the Les Enfants Terribles project. Liquid seems to equate his recessive genes as being lesser traits, but there's really no connection between dominant and recessive genes having anything to do with superiority. Dominance and recession in genes are simply how traits are selected through inheritance. If a dominant gene matches with another dominant gene or a recessive gene, then that dominant gene is going to be prominent. It's only by two recessive genes bonding that that trait is going to become expressed. For a simplistic example, having dark hair is a dominant trait and having light hair is a recessive trait. Therefore, if two people with these traits mate, then it's most likely that their offspring is going to have dark hair. It's clear that Kojima has some knowledge of this. For instance, you can see the example I just listed in Solid Snake and Liquid Snake's different color hair. However, it's confusing why Kojima used this as Liquid Snake's motivation. Then again, it's really only Liquid who's constantly babbling on about being inferior, so maybe they just wanted us to think he's an idiot. After Liquid's speech, we enter into the final fight of the game. I don't know any other way to put this. I despise this fight. For one, Kojima plays a nasty trick by taking away the first 30 seconds of the fight through a cutscene, before being bombarded by a lot of unknown factors. For first-time players, there's no way to know that Liquid can dodge you, or that he has a ridiculously strong charging bull attack, or that he's going to cling to the edge just like you, taking up your precious time. Every hit from Liquid is going to knock Snake down, where your hits put him into a recovery period that he can still hit you from. It seems like each time I play this fight, I find a new thing to dislike about it, but by far my most hated aspect is that Liquid Snake actually can't be beaten by taking down his health bar. The only way you can finish him off is to some way get him off the edge. Maybe the point was to hint towards Kojima's later reveal that Liquid actually was the quote-unquote superior brother, but that's really not enough reason for giving this much frustration to players at the end. Anyway, after knocking him off the edge, it's time to escape with either Otacon or Meryl, with what else but a turret section. Truth be told, I don't really mind this part too much, and other than Liquid's amazing aversion to bullets, it's actually pretty exciting. It's a fine way to finish off this game by resorting to the action movie trope of having the hero escaping a soon-to-be-destroyed facility. With Liquid Snake's passing, Kojima closes out the ending of the game, with Naomi going on and on about not letting your genes control your fate. Kojima put the theme of this game into one word, which was gene, and he used the story of Solid and Liquid Snake to underscore that one's genes have little to do with the way you live your life. It's a fairly beautiful message no matter who you are, and seeing Snake go off into the sunset has always been a pretty inspiring moment. This marks the end of my commentary for Metal Gear Solid. This is the first time I've ever really attempted any kind of commentary, or had a video be mostly non-scripted and just contain my thoughts. I do hope to follow up this commentary with further videos on Metal Gear Solid 2 and 3 and games beyond, so if you enjoyed it, I would certainly love to hear that below. I'll just end this here by saying, once again, thank you so much for watching, and I hope you take care.
I think I'm gonna like this new life.
Come on. Let's enjoy life.